My girlfriend said, "You'll always come back. You can't resist me," after another fight. I said, "Let's see." Then I took a step that broke her confidence completely. The moment she saw me again, she realized her blunder. I, 27M, never thought I'd be the type of guy to walk away from someone I genuinely loved. But there I was, standing in my girlfriend's living room after yet another explosive argument. Watching her smirk with that infuriating confidence she always wore like armor. The fight had started over something trivial. I'd canceled our dinner plans because of a work emergency. But like every disagreement we'd had over the past year, it escalated into something much deeper. She accused me of not prioritizing her, of being emotionally unavailable, of treating our relationship like an afterthought. Some of it stung because there was truth in it, but her delivery was cruel, calculated to wound. What really got to me was how she seemed to enjoy watching me squirm. There was something almost predatory in the way she'd corner me during these fights, backing me into emotional submission until I apologized for things that weren't entirely my fault. This pattern had been repeating for months, and I was exhausted. As I grabbed my jacket and headed toward the door, she called out with that trademark confidence dripping from her voice. She told me I'd always come back, that I couldn't resist her. She said I was too weak to actually leave, too dependent on what we had to walk away for real. I stopped at the door and turned around. Looking at her lounging on the couch with that self-satisfied expression, I felt something shift inside me. I told her we'd see about that. The moment I walked out, I knew something fundamental had changed. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't planning my return or crafting an apology in my head. I was done. The next morning, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called my college friend who worked at a tech company in Seattle. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and he'd been trying to recruit me for almost 2 years. The position was perfect, senior software architect with a significant pay bump and the chance to work on cutting-edge projects. Within 3 days, I had a formal offer. Within a week, I'd accepted it and put in my notice at my current job. The move would happen in 6 weeks. I didn't tell her about any of it. Instead, I went completely silent. No texts, no calls, no social media interaction. I knew she was watching. She'd always been obsessive about monitoring my online activity, so I made sure she could see I was active but just not responding to her. The first few days were harder than I'd expected. My phone buzzed constantly with her messages. Initially, they were angry, demanding to know what game I was playing. Then they shifted to confused, asking if I was okay. By day 4, there was a hint of desperation creeping in. She started calling multiple times a day. I let every single call go to voicemail. On day 7, she showed up at my apartment. I watched from my window as she knocked persistently, then sat in her car for 2 hours waiting. I never answered. She tried this 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, each visit lasting longer than the last. Meanwhile, I was systematically dismantling the life I'd built around our relationship. I canceled the vacation we'd planned for next month. I sold the expensive watch she'd given me for my birthday. I even started working out again, something I'd stopped doing because she'd complained it took time away from us. The most satisfying part was how good I felt. The constant anxiety I'd carried for months was gone. I slept better, worked more efficiently, and actually smiled again. I'd forgotten how peaceful life could be without someone constantly picking apart every decision I made. 3 weeks into my silence, she tried a different approach. She reached out to my friends, asking them to check on me because she was worried. When that didn't work, she started posting cryptic messages on social media about missing someone and making mistakes. I knew they were directed at me, but they only reinforced my decision. By week 4, her messages had become increasingly frantic. She was apologizing, promising to change, begging for just one conversation. She said she'd realized how much she needed me, how sorry she was for taking me for granted. She even sent a long email detailing all the ways she'd be different if I gave her another chance. I read every message, but I didn't respond to a single one. Week 5 was when I started making the physical preparations for my move. I quietly gave notice to my landlord, started packing non-essential items, and arranged for a moving company. I told my few close friends about the job opportunity, but asked them not to share it with anyone else yet. The brilliant thing about my plan was that it would accomplish 2 goals. It would prove definitively that I could resist her and move on, and it would give me a genuine fresh start in a new city where her manipulation tactics couldn't reach me. On the day before I was supposed to leave, she made one final desperate play. She showed up at my office. My coworker told me there was someone waiting for me in the lobby. When I saw her there, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She approached me with tears in her eyes, telling me she couldn't understand what was happening. She said she'd been going crazy not knowing if I was okay, if I was hurt, if I'd been in an accident. She demanded to know why I was treating her this way, what she'd done to deserve being ignored completely. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering all the times she'd used emotional manipulation to control me, all the times she'd made me feel small and dependent. Then I told her I was moving to Seattle tomorrow and that this was goodbye. The color drained from her face. She asked if I was serious, if this was some elaborate punishment for our fight. I explained that it wasn't punishment. It was me finally taking her advice and seeing if I could actually resist her and move on. She started crying then, real tears, not the calculated ones I'd seen before. She begged me not to go, promised things would be different, said she'd realized how much she loved me. But what struck me most was how different she looked, smaller somehow, less sure of herself. I told her she was right about one thing. I had always come back before. But she'd miscalculated how much a person could take before they stopped coming back entirely. The next morning, I loaded my car and drove away from the city where I'd spent the last 5 years of my life. Update 1. It's been 6 months since I moved to Seattle, and I'm writing this update because of something that happened last week that perfectly illustrated how much my life has changed. The job turned out to be everything my friend had promised and more. I'm working on projects that actually challenge me, with colleagues who respect my expertise. My salary increase allowed me to rent a beautiful apartment with a view of the Sound. I joined a hiking group and made new friends who knew nothing about my previous relationship drama. More importantly, I'd started dating someone new. Nothing serious yet, but she was kind, straightforward, and refreshingly drama-free. We communicated like adults when we disagreed, and she seemed to actually enjoy my company rather than seeing me as a project to fix or control. Last Tuesday, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from my old city. Usually, I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. It was her. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less confident. She told me she'd gotten my number from one of my former coworkers and hoped I didn't mind her calling. She asked how I was doing, if I was happy in Seattle, if I'd found a good job. The conversation was surreal. This was the same person who used to berate me for not reading her mind, who would start fights over nothing and then blame me for being defensive. Now she was being almost polite, tentative. She eventually got to the point. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking over the past 6 months, that she'd started therapy, and that she wanted to apologize for how she'd treated me. She admitted that she'd taken me for granted, that she'd been controlling and manipulative. She said losing me had forced her to confront some ugly truths about herself. I listened without saying much. Part of me felt vindicated. This was everything I'd wanted to hear during our relationship. But mostly, I just felt nothing. The anger was gone, but so was any desire for reconciliation. She asked if there was any chance we could try again. She said she was a different person now, that she understood what she'd lost. She even offered to move to Seattle if that's what it would take. I told her I appreciated the apology, and I was glad she was working on herself, but that ship had sailed. I explained that I'd built a new life here, one that didn't include the stress and drama of our old dynamic. I'd learned what it felt like to be in a relationship built on mutual respect rather than manipulation and power games. There was a long silence on the phone. Then she asked if I was seeing someone else. When I confirmed that I was, she started crying again. She said she'd held on to hope for months that this was just a phase, that eventually I'd realize we belonged together. She'd convinced herself that once I got the space I needed, I'd come back and we'd work things out. I told her the truth, that the space hadn't made me miss her more. It had shown me how much better life could be without constant conflict. I'd realized that love shouldn't feel like a battlefield, and compatibility couldn't be manufactured through willpower alone. Before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. She told me she finally understood what I'd meant that last day when I said she'd miscalculated. She'd been so confident in her power over me that she'd never considered the possibility that I might actually prefer being without her. Update 2. 3 months after that phone call, I got married. I know it sounds fast, but when you know, you know. The woman I'd been dating turned out to be everything I'd never known I was looking for. She was successful in her own right, emotionally intelligent, and treated our relationship as a partnership rather than a power struggle. The proposal wasn't elaborate. We were hiking one of our favorite trails, talking about the future, and it just felt right. We were both mature enough to know what we wanted, and neither of us saw any point in playing games or drawing out artificial timelines. I didn't think much about my ex during the wedding planning process. She'd become irrelevant to my life, just someone from my past who'd helped teach me what I didn't want in a partner. But the universe apparently had other plans. 2 weeks before the wedding, she showed up in Seattle. She'd somehow found out about the engagement, probably through social media or mutual friends, and had flown across the country to make one final appeal. She appeared at my office again, just like she had the day before I'd left. This time, though, I wasn't the same person she'd once been able to manipulate. I was confident, settled, genuinely happy. When I walked into the lobby and saw her there, I didn't feel anger or anxiety or guilt. I felt pity. She looked good. Clearly she'd been taking care of herself. But there was something desperate in her eyes that I'd never seen before. She started talking immediately, telling me she'd made a terrible mistake letting me go, that she'd never stopped loving me, that she'd changed completely since our breakup. I let her finish, then calmly told her I was getting married in 2 weeks to someone who made me happier than I'd ever been. I said I hoped she found that same happiness with someone else, but it wouldn't be with me. She broke down then, really broke down. She said she'd spent over a year trying to find someone else, but no one compared to what we'd had. She claimed she'd ruined the best thing in her life because of her pride and her need for control. What struck me most was how she seemed genuinely shocked that I'd moved on so completely. She kept saying she couldn't believe I was really getting married, as if the past year and a half had been some elaborate bluff I was calling. I realized then that she'd never truly understood me at all. She'd seen my previous inability to leave as weakness or dependency, when really it had been love and hope that things could get better. Once those were gone, there was nothing left to keep me tethered to her toxicity. I told her this wasn't about revenge or proving a point anymore. It was simply about building a life with someone who brought out the best in me instead of the worst. I wished her well, but I asked her not to contact me again. She left Seattle that evening. The wedding was perfect. Small, intimate, focused on celebrating the future rather than dwelling on the past. As I danced with my wife at our reception, I thought about the conversation that had started this whole journey. My ex had been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about one. I couldn't resist coming back. I just hadn't come back to her. I'd come back to myself. The most satisfying part wasn't that I'd proven her wrong or gotten some kind of revenge. It was that I'd discovered what healthy love actually looked like. I'd learned that the right person doesn't make you feel like you're constantly auditioning for their approval. They don't use your feelings against you or treat your devotion as a weakness to exploit. My ex had taught me what I didn't want, and my wife showed me what I did want. In the end, they were both exactly who I needed them to be in my story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the person who hurt you. It's becoming so genuinely happy without them that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss. She'd been confident I couldn't resist her, and she was right. I just found someone even more irresistible, the version of myself I became when I finally walked away. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.